Hello and welcome. This is Lita Downs from the Center for Faculty Excellence, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, To Say or Not to Say, Feedback as Kinder and Gentler. Today's offering was originally presented at the July 2018 National Faculty Meeting in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Our presenter on the line is Dr. Stephen Knight. He will be presenting this information today, and I want to just introduce Dr. Knight before we get started. Dr. Knight is a professor emeritus in the School of Higher Education, Leadership and Policy in the Richard W. Riley College of Education and Leadership. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Knight. Welcome.
Thank you, Lita, and thank you all for taking the time to watch this presentation today. It is definitely about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is feedback. Feedback comes in all forms, and we will have the opportunity to explore some a bit together. And I would encourage you as you go through, if you feel a need to stop and take a little extra time thinking about something I've said, please use the pause button to do that. That's certainly fine. And then pick it up. All right. So what are my goals for the session? Well, I have 5 goals. One of them, of course, is to explore the basic principles of this kinder and gentler feedback communication, and whether that's true whether we're delivering bad news or something else. Kinder and gentler is a term that actually was used by the associate dean who hired me first at Walden back in 2002. And it made so much sense to me that I have used it ever since, both in teaching as well as dealing with my work as program director. The next goal is we're going to get some practice being a knower and a doer. And because this is a recorded video, you will have to do this practice on your own, but I will suggest at points where you might want to do the pause thing and then practice. We're going to look at some of the words versus tone idea. And I think if you think about that for just a second, you'll understand totally what I mean with words versus tone. It's not always what one says, but how one says it that becomes problematic, or not. Then I will want to talk about the spoken versus written messages really a lot more. I know that most of us working for Walden do not do a great number of telephone calls. If we're working with doctoral students, we probably do, but if we are not working with doctoral students, then we probably don't quite as much as perhaps we should. And then we are going to have you take some time to practice rewording, and I'll give you those examples in just a second. So, the associate dean, as I say, who hired me a number of years ago now, used the term hedgehog. Well, her hedgehog of feedback had 3 primary principles. And I'm going to share those with you, and I hope that they are as meaningful for you as they were and are for me. Principle number 1 is with any feedback, make it personalized. Don't do generic feedback. Oh, that's great, or oh, you need to do follow APA more carefully, or your margins are out of bounds, or whatever. Just make it personalized to the individual. Make it timely. When you're providing feedback to a student, it's very important that that feedback come close in time to when the assignment was due. If an assignment is due on Sunday, the 1st, don't give feedback on it on the 15th. In other words, 2 weeks away is not timely. And thirdly, make it substantive. Make it really detailed. Don't just say follow APA. If I would suggest that what you might want to do is pick up the good old APA manual and find in the APA manual where specifically the information is. I would guess that most students don't have trouble with the average APA issues, but it's those sort of unusual things like how to do different levels. How do you format a level 1 heading or a level 3 heading or whatever? So those three ideas, feedback basics is what I call them, and it's what that associate dean called them: personalized, timely, and substantive. Those are really important things. Now, along with those important things, I am going to share with you what I consider the 10 commandments of delivering bad news. Bad news is never fun to do. Whether it is telling somebody that they did not pass that particular assignment, or that they're going to have to redo that assignment, or that their research proposal was not accepted, or whatever. So you should, I would suggest, try to follow all of the 10 commandments. And just like the original 10, all of them are important. The 10th commandment is never let your feedback be a surprise. The student should know over and over and over again from feedback exactly what you expect. Never delay giving that bad news. If it came in today and it was due today, don't put it off until next week thinking, oh, well, it'll go away. I can tell you, bad news never goes away. Never hide the facts. Never go to the standpoint of saying, well, I wish you would do such and such. No, the fact is that you didn't do what was expected. You're not meeting the standards. Say it. Always put it in writing. I know that some people will tell you never put anything in writing, including some of our lawyers. But in feedback, it's really important for the student to have it in writing so that they can go back and look at it, figuring out exactly what it is that you might have meant. Always justify it. Don't just say, do it. Give the student a reason why they need to do it one way as opposed to another way. I'm sure you all have heard that you should always begin any negative feedback with something that is good. I call that the silver lining. So always try to find something good to say about what the student has done before you give them what I consider bad news. And don't just give them the bad news. Commandment 4 says bring solutions. Tell them how they can do it better. You know, if it's getting more data points in their research, if it is using more information from their course readings or from the course videos or wherever, give them solutions on how it can become better. Please remember, Commandment 3, that you have multiple audiences that are listening to you and hearing you. And this is particularly true if you post generalized feedback in an announcement in the classroom. So remember, you've got different people, and different people are going to hear things differently. So just sort of keep that in the back of your mind. Commandment 2, always follow up and follow through. If you've told the student to do something, check with them. See if they've done it. If they haven't, follow through. If you told them that they were going to get a B on the paper or a C on the paper, do it. Don't become the good guy and say, oh, well, you know, perhaps I'll let you float by on this one. Don't. It sends the wrong message. And finally, the first commandment, I think, just like the original first commandment, is perhaps the most important. Always treat people with respect and dignity. You always need to treat them with respect and dignity. So think about these 10 commandments, if you will, and see if in your feedback to students, to colleagues, if you are following these all the time. And I'll tell you, it's not easy. And I won't tell you that I always follow them. I will tell you that I always try to follow them. Some of you may be familiar with an author named Stephen Covey. Covey has a great book. It's quite old now. It was called The 7 Habits of Effective People. And he has 7 habits, as you might guess. What you see on the screen now is habit 5. And habit 5 in dealing with feedback or dealing with people, I think, is the most important one. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. So try to figure out where the student is coming from. Why did they do whatever it was they did? And then tell them why they need to not do it that way. So seek first to understand, then to be understood. If you don't have this book on your professional bookshelf, I would suggest that you might want to get it. It is certainly apropos for all Walden faculty to have that book and to read it. It's very good. It talks about emotional bank accounts and lots of other things that are so apropos to us and our work. Some of you may remember, well, certainly you remember the cartoon character here, but some of you may remember as an elementary student yourself. I have to think way back for that. But in that thinking, there were times when I had to write on the board that I would or would not do certain things. And I just threw this in. First of all, it's from Grammarly, which we've used at Walden in classrooms to help write more correctly. But because our friend here is writing something that is very important, and it certainly could be one of our continuing resolutions throughout the year, not just New Year's, I will effectively communicate with others. I will effectively communicate with others, because that's the key in delivering feedback, is that effective communication. Perhaps it's the most important thing in communication. Feedback is this effectiveness, not to mention communication itself, of course. So, at its simplest, communication process is sender on one side, receiver on the other. So the sender desires to give some message to the receiver, so sends the message. The receiver gets the message, provides feedback to the sender. Okay, so let's say the faculty member in this case is the sender. So the faculty member says, on this particular assignment, you need to make sure that you have covered points 1, 2, and 3. The receiver, the student in this case, may say back to the faculty member, but there were only 2 points in the readings from this week. Okay, so there was a message sent, received, feedback was provided. So as you can tell, this great artwork, I cannot take credit for it, and you will see underneath all of the pictures in the screen here where various photos or illustrations came from. And you see this one here. So if you ever want to find very simple illustrations, you can use the point there under this particular feedback message. All right, so the simplest is right here. Unfortunately, in reality, it gets to be much more complicated than just sending and receiving. Now, there are some physical things in the receiving. Actually, there's physical things in the sending as well. If you don't have a voice box, or if you are unable to do sign language or unable to write or whatever, then you've got a physical problem with getting it across. But let's keep it simple for the moment and talk only about the vocal piece of this. So if I am sending a verbal set of instructions or verbal information, it has to be captured by the receiver. And what you see here is nothing more than a cross-section of a human skull, particularly the one that deals with the ear and hearing. Now, if you happen to be a member of our nursing faculty, you certainly are going to understand this, but all of the faculty needs to understand that what is sent out has to go through a process of being interpreted. So it's not just the sound being captured by the outer ear, going through the ear canal, vibrating the eardrum, shaking the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, and then the nerve is going off to the brain, and the brain understands it. But it's more than just I'm talking, you're hearing kind of thing. The physical process of that happening is pretty important. So with that in mind, I want to take that original diagram and make it a little more complicated. Now, I've used letters here instead of my beautiful stick figures, actually. So the S is still the sender, the R is still the receiver, the message is still the M, and the feedback is the F. So you can see the same loop that is happening here in a much less artsy kind of thing. I'm sure you all agree that my artwork was beautiful. Yeah, don't laugh, please. But anyway, as we are going on, so the sender is sending information, it's going through some channel. Now that channel can be auditory, it can be a verbal auditory thing, it can be visual, it can be tactile, there's all sorts of ways to send messages. But however it is sent, it has the possibility, you can see to the right side there of the message that there are two blocking arrows. There's a break. The message is not being received or it's causing confusion. It could be the standpoint that the individual simply doesn't speak the same language and therefore isn't really understanding what you're talking about. It could be that the person doesn't have the ability to hear, if I'm sending an auditory message, doesn't have the ability to hear, and you haven't been told that by disability services that this particular student needs visual cues as opposed to auditory cues. So, but something blocks it. So the same deal as it comes down, however, let's say it gets past that blockage, it gets to the receiver processes it in some fashion or other, and then sends feedback. You see those two arrows again. Somehow the feedback is not getting to you. I'm sure you've all heard the phrase speaking at cross purposes. It's like, we're hearing each other's words, but we're not understanding each other's meanings. And so that happens, and when you're giving feedback, I would opine that it happens more often than not. What is clear to you as the sender is not necessarily clear to the receiver. And their feedback to you may be clear to the receiver, but not necessarily clear to the sender. So going back to Covey's idea, seek first to understand. Okay, so try to understand. And it's good advice for students as well, not just for faculty. Yes, some of you probably have felt, I know I have from time to time, that, oh, good goodness gracious, why would that question come up again? And then I have to remember to chide myself if I do that and say, there are no dumb questions. Well, actually there is one, as you can see there on the screen. The only dumb question is one you have and don't ask. So if you take that tack with your students, you may get more questions, but you will probably get better understanding on their part because they will not be afraid to ask questions to you, being met with a sarcastic response or a smart alecky response or whatever. So please never say to a student that that's a dumb question. That will cut off feedback faster than anything. So you're not going to know whether you're doing what you are seeking to do or not. Yes. Now, I want you to look at this picture pretty carefully because on the left-hand side, you see the teacher standing at the front of the room, the stand and deliver kind of teacher. This would be the old joke, oh, the yellowing notes from this faculty member are the same that was used 30 years ago. I hope that you are never into that sort of category, that you are that teacher. But Walden, as you know, moves to a little bit different philosophy in what the teacher needs to do. On the second picture there on the right-hand side, you see the teacher sitting in the audience, learning along with other students. You see one student there at the front, and it says experts are everywhere. So I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I think I probably hit a mute button, and so some of you may have lost audio there for a second. But basically what I was saying was that in this case, at Walden, teachers, faculty members become very important in working with and becoming one with the student, not the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. And I know that's very trite, but it's very important that we want our students to be adult learners, and because of that, they have a little bit different expectation. So make sure that this happens, that you don't have to do everything. You've got students that can help. Now, when you are dealing with students in a feedback loop, it is very important to try to get to yes. Now, what do I mean getting to yes? That means that we agree on something. You know, we've had some disagreement. We have had pieces that you think A and I think B, or you think C, or I think D, or whatever. But there are guidelines that actually came out of some work at Harvard. It actually is now a book called Getting to Yes. And so these 6 guidelines that I'm going to be sharing with you are from that book. But they are very important, I would think, to all of us that deliver feedback to students, particularly when there is some chance of the student disagreeing with us. First of all, separate the people from the problem. Focus on interests, not positions. I'm the big teacher, you're the small student kind of thing. Learn to manage emotions. You don't have to be angry. Be calm. Same is true with the student. Express appreciation for what has been going on. You appreciate them being in your classroom, etc., etc. Put a positive spin. Remember, this is that same thing from the 5th commandment. a silver lining, put a positive spin there. And escape, if you can, the cycle of action-reaction. If you don't do this, I'm going to do that. You do that, I do this, the back and forth. I would suggest to you that these guidelines are good for dealing with any individuals with whom you might have some sort of disagreement or where you might have to deliver some bad news. This can also be a spouse, it could be a roommate, it could be a colleague, it can be a student, but all of us need to become better at getting to yes and less anxious to fall into the trap that I am right and you are wrong. That doesn't help getting to yes. Now, we talked about some communications before. I will tell you that in the following communications, all of the things that you see as samples on the screen are actual communications that I have had to deal with as program director. The names of the faculty members have been changed. If there's any student names in there, they have been changed. If there are any program areas that are mentioned, they have been changed. So I've tried to anonymize the individual so there's no way that you would know who this is. So our first example, student, good generic student there. Dr. Jones, you told me that I needed to spend more time on my work if I wanted to pass. I'd like to know how to do that since I told you that my wife is in the military and is deployed. You know I have 2 small children at home and I never get to even begin work on my dissertation research until at least 10 or 11 o'clock. I've got to keep up with my science teaching, papers, tests, planning for labs at Coronado High School if I want to keep my job and feed my kids. So please tell me, what do you expect me to do? All right, I read that, and it was a written communication originally. I read that in a very neutral fashion. I will tell you, if there's a Coronado High School, it's a total accident. We have Coronado National Forest here in Arizona, so I just picked a national forest and named it. But how would this be understood or felt, I should say, not understood, if I were to read it in an angry tone? Think about that. And I'm going to read it, a little bit of it, in an angry tone so that you can see what it sounds like, the difference that it sounds like. Dr. Jones, you told me that I needed to spend more time on my work if I wanted to pass. I'd like to know how to do that, since I already told you that my wife's in the military and is deployed. You hear the difference? You hear the difference in that tone? Now, as a faculty member, the faculty member who got this particular missive did not read it as easily as I did the first time, because when we read in our minds, we put our own spin on what's happening. Okay? But the faculty member, to, and I'm going to say his or her since you don't need to know whether it was male or female, to his or her credit, did a very good response, I thought. What he said, he or she said, I think I understand the frustration. I know it's not easy to be a single parent. Keeping up with little ones can be difficult, and you can read the rest of it. But you get the idea that the faculty member is trying to help the student, providing an opportunity for the student, what might make it easier, providing an opportunity for the student to perhaps suggest something that would be easier for him. Would working on a defined schedule keep the frustration down? It might be helpful to look at your free time and to pick that time to do your work. suggest a schedule for work, and look for just 30 minutes at a time. So the faculty member did a really good job, I thought, in diffusing what could have been a pretty nasty situation with this particular student. Now, some of you may have picked up on this as you read this, but I want to point out some things. The way messages get there. The you and I message. So I just pulled a few things out of the student's response. Dr. Jones, you told me. You that my wife is in the military. You, what you expect me to do. You hear? The student was trying to put the entire onus of the problem on the faculty member. First of all, the faculty member created the problem. You told me. And I've already told you that my wife's in the military. Why didn't you remember it? You know, you hear that. Again, as I said, I thought the faculty member did a pretty good job. Did not resort to you messages. Used a lot of I messages. I think, I know, I'm suggesting. Not that it's the only way to do it, but in my role as faculty member, I think I can provide this information. So it's not a you need to do this, it's an I. And that's very good. Also, it's very good if you're dealing with issues with the same group of people I mentioned to you before. Spouse, roommate, colleague. Get away from that blame, you, unto I. You caused the problem. You didn't have dinner fixed. You wrecked the car. You whatever. So just try to avoid so many you messages. They're not all possible, but try to avoid some of them. If you notice what that faculty member did, he was using things like I feel, because, when, what I need is. Very, very clear I messages. For me as faculty member, this is what I need to help move forward in this process. I. So please take those, if you can, to heart and remember them when you are delivering the message to students about anything where you have to deliver feedback that might be a little bit perceived as negative. So we talked a little bit about words and tone, and I certainly am not going to read this multiple list of words versus tone, but these are words that sometimes have negative connotations on the part of the reader. Words like bad, not, must, stop, terrible, wrong. You can hear them. And of course, I was delivering them in a way that emphasized their badness, if you will. But all of these words have connotations that many, and perhaps even most people, perceive negatively. So avoid them if you can. So I want to give you some more examples. Again, remember, these are real examples that occurred. So instead of saying, don't forget to double space all references. I mean, that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? But if I am considering the tone, what this says to me, the words are the words, okay? I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of those words. But what they are saying is, hey, there's something wrong with you. You're forgetting to do things. Now, will all students hear it that way? No, they won't, okay? But some will. And if they hear it that way, we can get rid of that kind of hearing instead by saying, remember to double space all references. See, it takes it away from the don't forget, which are sort of negative, to remember. Another example. I'm sorry, we can't discuss whether or not it's appropriate to use this particular data set because IRB is unavailable over the weekend. Well, again, that doesn't sound particularly negative, but look at the words. Sorry, can't, which is cannot, unavailable, sort of negative connotes there. So how about we can discuss using secondary data on Monday when IRB is available. So you get rid of any potential for a student taking offense. Now, should they take offense over that? I would suggest to you, no, they should not. However, whether they should or shouldn't, if they do, they do. And the last example of word and tone, I'll be out of town July 26 until July 30 at the National Faculty Meeting, and will not be able to conference with you until after that. Well, again, doesn't sound particularly negative, and I have had my out-of-office message say something very similar to this. Okay? But how about simply saying, first of all, there's too much information there. I can meet with you after July 30. Okay, so it's much simpler. It doesn't give all that information. It doesn't talk about not. I will be out of town. Okay, students don't need all that information. They just don't need it. So as we think about spoken and written, remember we talked about that at the beginning of this session, where we said many lawyers would tell you never put anything in writing, do everything verbally, because you can't be held responsible for verbal responses. Well, first of all, that's not true. But spoken responses sometimes are easier to be misunderstood depending on how it's delivered. Spoken language typically is more casual. Sometimes it can be very preachy. It can certainly be sarcastic. It can seem to be, to the student, condescending. Written words, and I think when we all write things down, we tend to write in a more formal fashion. We tend to provide more information. We become more informative. We tend to take a serious approach to that, and we're seeking understanding. So spoken versus written. There was a researcher, Albert Morabian, he's got the 738-55 rule of communication, and he says that only 7% of the spoken words actually gets across what it is that you're trying to convey. 38% of voice and tone, or 38% of the understanding is voice and tone, but 55% is actually looking at the body language, seeing whether or not the receiver of your information is actually understanding. It's a better feedback loop than some other things. Now, obviously, I cannot see you right now. I'm hoping that you are understanding what I am saying, but I don't know that because I can't see you. If we had the opportunity to do this in a synchronous fashion and I had you all on Zoom or Skype so I could actually see you on the screen, then I would be in a much better position to understand whether or not you have a clear idea of the information that I'm trying to get across. But we don't deal in that kind of world. So the best world that we deal in is going to be written, and then if we are on the phone. So we can never see more than about 45% of the understanding on a phone, and it would be even less in written communication. So just keep that in mind. Now I have 8 items here, and obviously we are not going to reword them for a kinder sound, but I will tell you that what I hope that you will do is that you will take the opportunity to look at these 8 one by one and see if you can find where this might cause aggravation to a student. Consider whether or not you have said this or something like this to a student yourself. Now, what I would suggest that you do here is to take just a bit, pause the recording so that you actually can go through these on a one-on-one. So again, you'll need to do that if you're going to read them. I certainly am not going to read them to you, but that is what you might have to do. So what I would do is to show you an example of what I mean that I hope you will do. Let's look at the last one here. Go to the Writing Center to get help. I'm not a writing teacher. In my case, that is true. I am not a writing teacher. I have, however, in my many, many years as a faculty member, as a student myself, I have written things, and I think my writing conveys meaning pretty well. So why would I want to tell the student to go to the Writing Center to get help? I'm not a writing teacher. All right. If the student is wanting to know things about gerunds, or if they're wanting to know things about dangling participles, or if they're wanting to know things, etc., you get the idea, then I probably can't help with that. Even though I guess if I went back, I could probably figure out what a gerund is. It's a verb used as a noun. See, I did look it up for this presentation. But that's not helping the student if that's what he or she is trying to do. So what would be a better way to present this information to a student? You know, I am going to do this would be a faculty member talking now. I'm going to do my best to help you with the writing. Let me tell you where I see the phrasing of your sentences perhaps is a little confusing to the reader. And then give an example of where that might be. Perhaps it's a run-on sentence, perhaps it's a incomplete sentence, whatever. And simply point that out to show the student what it is that's a problem. Now, I think you've got to provide the caveat to the student that you are not, well, some of you may be, not an expert at writing, but you, like me, have done lots and lots of writing in your careers and continue to do so. But you're not a writing expert unless you happen to be an English person, and then you are a writing expert and you probably can provide lots of help. But simply saying to a student, go to the Writing Center to get help, I'm not a writing teacher, doesn't make that student feel, first of all, very good about your ability. You are a faculty member, and whether we like it or not, faculty members are supposed to know things. I mean, the student could care less that you're not an English person. You're telling the student that their writing is not good, so give me some examples. What can I do better? So you help them where you can. You take some of that time. To me, this sentence, and this was an actual phrasing from a written communication that happened with a faculty member that I was working with. This communication is, leave me alone. I don't have time to mess with you. I mean, that's what I heard when I saw this, and I thought, you can't be serious. You can't say something like this to a student. The same is true for all of these, and all of these came from that list of 8 that you looked at earlier. So these were just a few that I picked out, and I wanted to use the Writing Center as an example so that you could see how you might do a better job with that. So in the process that we have gone through today, we've looked at becoming a learner, We've looked at becoming a knower. We have talked about being kinder and gentler, hearing first, seeking first to understand, the process of communication. So all of those things we have talked about. But quite honestly, it is now up to you to operationalize them. Now, we are not here so that I could say, if you want more information, put it in the chat box or raise your hand, which you would do in a regular webinar. But this is a recorded webinar. So I want to offer to you the ability to have me be your feedback. So you see my email there. You see the telephone number on this slide. That is a Washington, D.C. cell phone number. Please do not call because on Washington time, even though that's a Washington number, I am in Arizona. So depending on the time of year, I'm either 3 hours off from East Coast time or I am 2. So Arizona, because of our heat, among other things, does not do daylight savings time. So we are always on Mountain Standard Time. So if you're listening to this recording during the summer, then we functionally are on California time. If you are listening to it in the fall or winter, then we are on Denver time. So it just depends on when you're listening. But my point is, don't call me on this number at 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern time. Either case, because I am either not going to answer the call at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m., or if I do, you might get yawn, what? But I can tell you, I probably will not answer the phone at that hour. So, but I do want to be a sounding board for you. So if you would like to practice, if you would like to have ideas, if you would like just to chat, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. I can tell you that I have really, really enjoyed doing this presentation because I am a firm believer that feedback is the most important thing that we do as Walden faculty members. So remember, feedback is timely, it's personal, and it's substantive. With that, Christy, I guess I'll turn it back over to you to end this. Lita.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Knight. But always just a wealth of information, and the tips for feedback are priceless. So I really appreciate you not only presenting today, but also presenting at our national faculty meeting. I know it was very well received in person at that meeting, and I'm sure those listening to today's recording will say the same. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and Dr. Knight, it's been a pleasure, and I'm looking for the next webinar. We'll put some thoughts in your mind on your next webinar.
All right. Thank you.